All right, so get this, listeners. Today, we're gonna dive deep into the world of Edia's railroads.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, and I think you'll find it pretty interesting. It's a wild ride, let me tell you.
Yeah.
We're talking about game-changing beginnings, some pretty controversial mergers, even a runaway train,
Oh, wow.
and a bridge collapse that, well, it really shook the entire country.
Wow.
We've got a mountain of sources here.
Re-
We've got historical articles, some breaking news reports, court transcripts, and get this, even a pretty tense CEO interview.
Well, it sounds like we've got our work cut out for us.
Oh, we definitely do. But, it's amazing how Edia's railroads really mirror a lot of the challenges that, well, that a lot of countries face.
Absolutely. It's that constant push and pull between, well, ambition and reality and trying
Yeah.
to balance progress with, the potential downsides.
Exactly. Okay, so let's rewind the clock, way back to 1875.
Okay.
We're in Somerset, a small village, just 1,500 people, very small. And this is where Edia's very first railroad, the Somerset and Northern Railway, came to life.
You have to remember, this wasn't just about connecting this tiny village to the iron mines up north. It was a symbol. It was about Edea embracing progress, putting itself on the map.
It really makes you wonder, what was it like to be there in that crowd watching that first train pull out? Must have been something.
Oh, I bet.
But, okay, let's fast forward now to 1974, a time of some big, big changes in the railroad world. We see the birth of the Sow Belt, a huge merger of 4 different railroads.
And it's important to remember that this wasn't just like a merging of tracks. Each of these railroads had its own identity, its own culture.
Right.
You had the Aurora Bayshore Railway, the oldest, the most established. And then you had the Southern Edian Road, known for being, well, really close to the local communities.
Mm-hmm.
You also had the Simpleton and Western Railroad, small but dependable. And then the Atlantic Northwest Express Railroad. They were struggling, but they were always trying to innovate.
Wow. Talk about a melting pot of railroad cultures, each one hoping that this merger was going to be their ticket to success. But, a lot of times these big mergers led to, well, to people losing their jobs.
Right.
What was the impact on these communities?
Well, that's the thing with mergers. It's always a gamble, right?
Right.
The goal is to become more efficient, to reach more places. But, there's often clashes of culture. People worry about their jobs. The impact on the communities could be good or bad. Some would benefit from the increased trade, but others would feel the negative side of these economic shifts.
Yeah.
And the Sow Belt was no exception.
Okay, so let's switch gears now. Let's jump to 2005. This was straight out of an action movie.
Oh,
The blank train runaway incident in Belasco.
I've heard about this.
Oh, yeah.
This was big news.
A train, no one driving it, speeding through downtown Belasco at 60 miles an hour.
In a 20-mile-an-hour zone.
Yeah. It barely missed curves, intersections, thanks
Right.
to some quick thinking by the Belasco City Police. They were on their game that day.
For sure.
So what caused the blank train to go rogue like that? Was it a mechanical problem? Human error? Something else?
Well, if you look at the accident report, it was a kind of a perfect storm of things. The
Mhm.
brake system malfunctioned, and then there was a miscommunication between the crew during a switching procedure. It really shows how important those safety protocols and, clear communication are in this industry.
It's amazing, really, that no one was hurt, especially when you consider that the train was heading straight for an oil refinery.
Yeah, that could have been really bad.
Really bad. Okay, let's shift tracks now. Let's move on to something, a little more complicated. It's 1985, and we're looking at the fallout from the Madison Energy Research Facility explosion. The Rutland Railroad, which was contracted by Quantum Corp, was transporting some mysterious materials.
Yeah. And the court transcripts from the investigation after, they show a real battle going on. The prosecutors trying to find out what was being transported, and the defense, they're just stonewalling, saying, confidential, can't tell you.
It sounds like a spy movie. Do those transcripts give us any clues as to what those materials were?
Sadly, no. The details are still top secret. So a lot of unanswered questions. This incident really shows the tension between, national security and the public's right to know, especially when you're dealing with potentially dangerous materials. It's a debate that's still going on today.
Okay, hold on tight, everyone, because we're about to witness the rise and fall of Edian Rail, LLC.
Oh, this is a wild one.
They burst onto the scene in 2017, just buying up everything. They acquired 4 rail companies, 5 railroads, including the Sow Belt and Blank. Remember, Blank had that runaway incident just a few years before.
And they didn't stop there. They even snagged the River Railroad, a really important part of Edia's rail network. And, well, we'll talk about this later, but the River Railroad has a pretty colorful history.
It really seemed like they were on their way to creating a massive rail empire. But then, just 2 months later, their plans for this mega merger, the Edian system, hit a wall.
A big wall. Their application was denied. It was a shock. And their strategy of expanding so quickly, well, it completely backfired. They had a ton of debt, and investors started losing confidence.
And then the news that no one wanted to hear,
Well,
especially right before Christmas, massive layoffs. Hundreds of employees lost their jobs.
Tough time to lose your job.
Awful. And we actually have a clip here of a pretty heated interview with the CEO, Richard Barnes. He's trying to explain these decisions to a room full of angry employees, and there's even a local politician in there grilling him.
Oh, that must have been tense. It's interesting to hear him trying to justify it all, blaming the failed merger, saying they had no choice. But, he does promise a brighter future, talks about restructuring, new partnerships. But you can really feel the tension. It's a real reminder of the human cost of these big corporate decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. So what were some of the things that the employees and the politician were saying? What were they worried about?
Well, the employees were really upset about the lack of notice and the timing, right before the holidays. They felt like the company wasn't loyal to them.
Right.
And the politician was focused on the bigger picture, the impact on the whole community. He was really critical of how Edian Rail LLC handled everything and wanted more transparency, more accountability.
It sounds chaotic. So what happened next? Did they manage to recover?
Well, even though the CEO was promising a turnaround, things just kept getting worse. By January of 2018, the news broke. Edian Rail LLC was going down.
Wow. What a turn of events. So what happened to all those railroads that they bought?
Well, they had to sell a lot of them. So industries, including the Sowbelt and Blank, went back to their previous owners. And the River Railroad was put up for sale. To try and save themselves, Edian Rail LLC filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
It's almost poetic. This company that wanted to own everything, they ended up losing almost everything. But what about the people? Those employees who lost their jobs, the communities that depended on these railroads.
Yeah, the human cost was huge. The layoffs were tough on a lot of families, and the effects were felt throughout the region. It shows that even the biggest, most ambitious companies can make decisions that had a devastating impact on real people.
So here we are in 2025. The Edian rail landscape is completely different now. We have a list here of the top 13 largest railroads. You've got the giants like the Belasco and Southern Furwood Railroad and the Sowbelt, which is back in the game. And then the smaller lines like the Rutland Railroad and the River Railroad, which somehow managed to survive.
It's amazing to see how the industry has reshaped itself. Some of the old players are back, but they've definitely learned some hard lessons. And we have new companies like the Cornfield Line Road. They just got a big contract with Bowler Aerospace, which shows that there's still room for growth and innovation.
It sounds like the Edian rail system's gone through a lot. But from what you said, there are still some shadows from the past, right?
Yeah.
Mistakes that haven't been forgotten.
You're definitely picking up on something there. The story of Edie's railroads isn't just about money and business. It's about what happens when you ignore the foundations that this industry was built on. And that brings us to 2023 and the Haviland steel trestle disaster.
Yeah, this wasn't just an accident. It was a wake-up call. A reminder that progress doesn't mean you forget the past.
Imagine this. A massive train, 142 cars, loaded with shipping containers, rumbling across a steel bridge that's been there since the 1930s. It was originally built by the Gulch Lake and Clark Railroad, and over the years, a bunch of other lines have used it. And down below, a big cargo ship is sailing along the Scott Willow River, completely unaware of what's about to happen.
It's a scene that, well, I bet it played out 1,000 times without any problems.
Yeah.
So what went wrong this time?
The train was just too heavy for the old bridge.
Yeah.
The back of the train, 89 cars, they break off, falling 190 feet into the river. They landed right on the ship. 15 crew members died. It was a horrible tragedy. The whole country was in shock.
It's hard to even imagine. What did the investigation find out? What caused the collapse?
Well, it all came down to neglect. The River Railroad, they'd owned the bridge for 15 years, and they just hadn't taken care of it. They didn't inspect it enough. They put off important repairs. They were basically gambling with people's lives to save money.
That's just awful. It really makes you question who's responsible, who's supposed to be watching over these things. How could this happen in a modern rail system?
That's the big question, isn't it? After the disaster, everyone was calling for stricter inspections, tougher safety rules, and, people wanted someone to be held accountable. But will anything really change? That's what we have to see.
Makes you think about all those other bridges, tunnels, tracks out there that could be in the same condition. What did they do after the Haviland steel trestle collapsed to prevent another disaster?
Well, right after the collapse, everyone jumped into action. The government started inspecting bridges all over the country, and they rushed to put new safety rules in place. But, it remains to be seen if it'll be enough.
So they rebuilt the bridge, right? It was a pretty important part of the rail network.
Yes, they did. And now it's kind of a symbol of how resilient the industry is, but also a reminder of the terrible consequences of neglecting infrastructure. They built a memorial at the base of the bridge on the banks of the Scott Willow River. It's a reminder of the lives lost and hopefully the lessons learned.
As we go deeper into Edia's rail history, it's clear that the Haviland steel trestle disaster is a turning point. It makes us face some hard truths about progress and safety, about ambition and responsibility. What do you think, long-term, will be the impact of this event on Edia's railroads?
I think it will be a defining moment. It's shown how vulnerable the system is and how urgently we need to invest in infrastructure. But, it's also a chance for the industry to learn from its mistakes and build a safer, more sustainable future.
There's been a lot of ups and downs, that's for sure. From that first railroad back in 1875, the Somerset and Northern Railway, to the complex network we have today, we've seen mergers, controversies, a runaway train, and a devastating bridge collapse. We've seen how these individual railroads, each with their own unique stories, have shaped Edea, and how their fates have been intertwined in surprising ways. What stands out to you as the most important takeaway from all of this?
What strikes me is how much the story of Edia's railroads is like the story of so many countries. It's that constant struggle between what we want to achieve and what's actually possible. It's about pushing for progress, but understanding that there can be unintended consequences.
It's a lot to think about, for sure. But we're not done with our journey through Edia's rail history just yet. We have one more stop to make, and it's a bit of a head-scratcher.
You're right. There are. It's like the story of Edia's railroads. It's not just about, who made money and who lost money.
Right.
It's about what happens when you don't take care of the basic stuff, the foundations.
Yeah.
And that brings us to, well, a pretty dark chapter. 2023, the Haviland steel trestle disaster.
Yeah, this was a big one. It was a real wake-up call. Like you said, progress doesn't mean forgetting about the past.
Exactly. Okay, so picture this. You've got this massive train, 142 cars, double stack, full of shipping containers, and it's rumbling across this steel bridge, this trestle. And this thing, it's been standing there since the 1930s.
Wow.
Built by the Gulch, Lake and Clark Railroad. And over the years, a lot of different railroads have used it. And down below, you've got this big cargo ship just sailing along the Scott Willow River. No idea what's about to happen.
It's a scene that, I bet it happened thousands of times without a problem. So what went wrong that day?
Well, the train, it was too much weight for the old bridge. And the back of the train, 89 cars, they break off. And they fall, get this, 190 feet. Right into the river.
Oh my God.
Landed right on top of the ship. 15 crew members were killed. It was a terrible, terrible accident. The whole country was in shock.
It's hard to even imagine. So what did they find out in the investigation? What caused it?
They found that it was basically neglect. The River Railroad, they'd owned the bridge for 15 years. And they hadn't kept up with the maintenance. They weren't inspecting it enough. They were delaying repairs. They were risking people's lives to save money.
That's just heartbreaking. It makes you wonder, who's really responsible for making sure these things are safe? How could something like this happen in this day and age?
That's the million-dollar question, right? After this happened, everyone was calling for more inspections, stricter rules, and, people wanted to hold someone accountable. But, the question is, will things actually change?
Yeah, that's the big question. It makes you think about all the other bridges, tunnels, tracks out there that could be in the same kind of shape. So what did they do after the Haviland steel trestle collapsed to try to prevent another disaster?
Well, there was a lot of activity. Right after it happened, the government started inspecting bridges all across the country, and they really pushed to get some new safety regulations in place. But whether it'll be enough, well, I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Right. So they did rebuild the bridge, right? It was a pretty important connection.
Oh, yeah, they did. And now it's kind of a symbol. It shows how, how the industry can bounce back, but it's also a reminder of how dangerous it can be to ignore infrastructure. And they built a memorial there at the base of the bridge on the Scott Willow River to remember the people who were lost and, well, hopefully the lessons that were learned.
It's powerful stuff. And as we're going through all this history, it's clear that the Haviland steel trestle, it was a turning point. It made people face some hard truths about, well, about progress and safety, ambition and responsibility.
Yeah.
What do you think the long-term impact will be on Edea's railroads?
I think it will be remembered as a defining moment. It showed everyone how vulnerable the system is, and it highlighted how much we need to invest in infrastructure. But it's also, it's a chance. It's a chance for the industry to really learn from what happened.
Yeah.
And build a better future, a safer future.
Absolutely. And, we've seen a lot of ups and downs in this deep dive. From that very first railroad, the Somerset and Northern, back in 1875, to the network we have today. It's been a long journey. We've seen mergers, we've seen controversies, that runaway train, and then, of course, the bridge collapse. And, it's amazing to see how these different railroads, each one with its own story, have really shaped Ediea, and how their fates are all connected, sometimes in surprising ways. What stands out to you? What's the most important thing you take away from all of this?
What really strikes me is how similar the story of Edea's railroads is to the story of a lot of countries. It's that constant struggle between, what we want to do and what's actually possible. It's about wanting progress, but also realizing that there can be, consequences that we didn't expect.
That's a really good point. It's a lot to think about. But we're not quite done with our journey yet. There's one more stop, and it's a bit of a mystery. Okay, so one more stop, you said. What is it? What's the mystery?
Well, you remember how Ediea Rail LLC, they went bankrupt back in 2018.
Yeah.
Well, in all that selling off, getting rid of stuff to stay afloat, they held on to one thing, a collection of steam locomotives.
Steam locomotives.
Yeah.
In 2018, that's a bit odd, isn't it? They were a company that was practically going under.
Yeah, it definitely raised some eyebrows. Here they are, struggling to survive, selling off parts of the business. And they keep these relics from the past. Doesn't seem to make much sense financially.
So why? Why would they do that? Was it like a sentimental thing, trying to hold on to a piece of their history?
That's the big question, isn't it? Some people think they might have seen some potential there, like maybe using them for tourist attractions, scenic tours, special events.
Yep.
Others think it was just a misguided attempt to preserve something, a piece of Edea's railroading past, even while the modern system was, kind of falling apart.
It's interesting, isn't it? Holding on to the past while facing this uncertain future, it makes you think about what they were really trying to do. So what happened to those locomotives in the end?
Well, they ended up being given to a new nonprofit. They're dedicated to preserving Edea's railroad history. So, in a way, Ediea Rail LLC's decision, even though it seemed strange at the time, it did help save those locomotives. They're on display now at museums and heritage railways across the country, reminders of a different era.
It shows that even with all the progress, all the new technology, there's still a place for the past. It's another piece of this whole complicated story of Edea's railroads. And as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that these railroads, they're more than just tracks and trains. They're a reflection of Ediea itself, the ambitions, the struggles, the successes, the tragedy.
Yeah, definitely. And we've seen how wanting progress can sometimes lead to some negative things, like with the Haviland steel trestle.
Right.
But we've also seen how people can, they can adapt, they can rebuild, even when things are really tough.
That's true. So what do you think? What does the future hold for Edea's railroads?
It's a good question. I guess we have to wait and see. Will they learn from the mistakes? Will they invest in making the system safer, more sustainable? Can they balance, ambition with responsibility, progress with preservation? Only time will tell.
Well, one thing's for sure, Edea's railroads, they're going to keep fascinating people and sparking debate, maybe even inspiring people for years to come. And that's it for our deep dive into Edea's railroads. Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope you enjoyed it.